Well, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to have you with us. I'm Todd Sanders, President and CEO of the Greater Phoenix Chamber. Really pleased to have you with us today for, I think, a very timely and important conversation. Met with our executive committee this morning and recognized that it was a year ago at this time we had our last in-person executive committee meeting, and so much has changed. We've learned so much in that time. I know that we thought we'd be out for a couple months when we closed the offices, and certainly that was optimistic. And I think in that time, while it's definitely been an interesting place to be, I think we're starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel. And so we're really pleased to have you with us today for this discussion. Just a couple things. We're going to have some presentations, and what I'm ask you to do is if you could submit your questions through the Zoom function, that will be tremendous. That will give us an opportunity to ask the questions you have on your mind, and for you to be able to listen. We have some really interesting speakers. We're going to hear first from Travis Pacheco, who is with Fennemore Craig, and he practices the areas of employment and labor business litigation. Has a significant resume, and I think you're going to be impressed with what he's going to talk about today. And really what we're focusing on is the idea of, as we come back into the offices, what can or can't we ask our employees to do? Clearly, there's the vaccine is starting to get rolled out, and we're hopeful about that, but certainly there's going to be a certain part of the population that's not going to want to do that. So we're going to be able to really understand what that looks like. And then we're going to hear from two business leaders and members of the chamber to talk to us about their perspectives. And obviously, these are businesses that have been open during this time and have done it very successfully. So we're very pleased to hear from those business leaders as well. So encourage you to be an active attendee, ask your questions, and hopefully if there are things that we didn't get answered during this time, we'll hopefully be able to circle back with you and get you those answers. I do want to take a moment first to thank our sponsors. So our sponsors for today are Blue Cross Blue Shield, Equality Health, BBVA, Cigna, Delta Dental, and the Arizona Diamondbacks. Let's give them all a virtual round of applause. So with that, I'm going to now turn it over to Melissa Diaz for a brief update, and then we'll jump into our program with Travis. Melissa?
Thank you, Todd. Yes, we're so excited. Welcome everybody to today's WorkWELL webinar. We have just a few updates for you on Wellness A to Z. With our Wellness A to Z employers, our most recent Wellness A to Z employer is the American Cancer Society. So welcome. We're so excited to have you on board with us. And just a reminder about our Healthy Arizona Pledge that we launched at the end of 2020 in hopes of bringing awareness to our community about simple ways that you can slow the spread of COVID-19. So we encourage you to visit our Healthy Arizona Pledge. It takes less than 2 minutes to complete, and it's really just a way of saying, I will do my part to keep our community safe. And then, as I mentioned, our Wellness A to Z employers, we have different levels. We have our silver, gold, and platinum. And so just want to recognize our employers. So we have our platinum employers here. Our next slide, we have our gold employers and our silver level employers as well. And I believe, next slide, please. If you are interested in learning more about Wellness A to Z, if this is your first time joining us today, welcome. We are excited to have you. But if you want to learn more about what it means to be a Wellness A to Z employer, please feel free to reach out to us. I'm glad to answer any questions that you have. There are so many benefits of being an employer, and we'd love to have you. Okay, great. So we will go ahead and get started with our presentation and our first speaker, which is Travis Pacheco with Fennemore Craig. And so a little bit about Travis Pacheco. He practices in the areas of employment and labor and business litigation. He has litigated cases involving enforcement of restrictive covenant agreements, including non-compete agreements and employee wage and hour claims. He has also successfully defended employers against charges of employment discrimination, harassment, and wrongful termination claims filed with the state and federal agencies, including the EEOC and the Arizona Attorney General's Civil Rights Division. Travis assists employers and HR personnel by navigating them through the broad spectrum of federal and state employment laws to ensure compliance, drafting employment handbook policies, and by drafting and enforcing various employment agreements. On his free time, Travis enjoys spending time with his wife and kids and coaching Little League Baseball. He has a passion for world travel, Major League Baseball, and music, in which he is classically trained in piano. So thank you for joining us, Travis. We're so excited to hear from you.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here. Guys, I'm sure that many of you would rather be watching a spring training game right now, but here we are talking about COVID-19 in the workplace. Let me go ahead and share my screen real quick. Let's see. Okay. So I'm going to begin today by, thank you for the warm welcome, Melissa and Todd. I'm going to begin today by giving you just a brief update on the significant employment law in 2021 for both Arizona and on the federal level. But I'm going to spend the bulk of my presentation today talking about legal implications with respect to vaccination programs, employer vaccination programs. Okay, I've got to give you the obligatory legal disclaimer here that these PowerPoint slides don't constitute legal advice, so they don't. And what I'm telling you doesn't either. Everybody's company, everybody's situation is different. Facts and context really matter. So if you need legal advice on any issues, you make sure you contact your appropriate legal counsel to discuss and consult with. These will highlight some things you need to consider, though. So as far as the employment law updates for Arizona, I'm just going to briefly run through these. Many of you already know this, but Arizona minimum wage increased $12.15. And City of Flagstaff increased actually to $15. The Arizona Civil Rights Act was amended. Governor Doug Ducey signed HB 2045 on February 4th of this year. It's amended to prohibit discrimination against employees because of pregnancy, childbirth, or related medical conditions. Many of you might be saying, I thought that was already prohibited. Well, it is on the federal level, and it's prohibited. It's been prohibited since 1978 with the Pregnancy Discrimination Act, which amended Title VII. Now the Arizona state law has specifically addressed that, and it wasn't specifically addressed before, even though that was prohibited on the state level as under gender discrimination or sex discrimination. It expressly says that now. So for many employers, this is not going to be a major impact. You just want to make sure that you review your policies and practices at your employment handbooks to make sure that they say that the company is not going to be discriminating against individuals based on pregnancy or childbirth or medical conditions. The big one here too is in just the last election, Prop 207 was passed. It's recreational marijuana, which legalizes the sale and possession of marijuana for adult recreational use. And I want to dig into that just a little further for you. Just kind of give you the lay of the land on what that does to the extent you don't know. It allows adults 21 years or older to use, possess, or transfer up to 1 ounce of marijuana. It allows adults to cultivate for personal use, not commercial use, guys, more than 6 marijuana plants, 12 if 2 or more adults are residing in the same home, and provided that the plants are secure. It bans smoking marijuana in public places and open spaces, the law. So your employees cannot go outside, smoke weed, and then come back in and start working. That's not allowed. It amends criminal classifications, penalties for marijuana possession and use, and allows courts to vacate certain marijuana charges and convictions. And it imposes a significant tax on marijuana sales to fund community colleges, infrastructure, public safety, and public health programs. So what does this mean for employers? As far as the legal landscape, it doesn't change a whole lot. Employers can still maintain drug-free workplace policies and continue to restrict the use of marijuana. And that language is directly in the law. I'm not going to read it to you, but I have it here on the slide. So it still allows employers to do that. I think the biggest thing is some employees may need to be educated on it. You know, if they come to work, they say, hey, we're allowed to smoke marijuana now, it's recreational. They can't come to work impaired. It's just like alcohol. Alcohol is legal, but you can't come to work drunk, right? So employers need to be on the lookout for observable signs of impairment and document that. And also the biggest issues still, and you know, is with the medical marijuana and the safety sensitive carve out from that. Those issues are litigated. They're currently being litigated. There's constitutionality issues with respect to the Arizona Medical Marijuana Act or excuse me, the drug testing statutes and the safety sensitive position. That issue in itself could take an hour to explain. So I just want to highlight for you, it's those issues are still out there being litigated with respect to Arizona Medical Marijuana Act. On the federal side, in June of 2020, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that Title VII prohibits employment discrimination against gay and transgender individuals. I realize that that's, in 2020, but some people, employers need to make sure that their policies are updated to reflect that there's no discrimination permitted against gay and transgender individuals, which falls under the category of sex and gender discrimination. It resolved a circuit split of decision among the circuit courts of appeal. And so that is decided now. Also, December 31st of 2020, the Family First Coronavirus Response Act, the paid leave requirements expired. So that's paid sick leave, federal paid sick leave, emergency paid sick leave, as well as federal expanded Family Medical Leave Act. That expired on December 31st, but employers can still extend the paid leave benefits and receive a tax credit subject to the applicable caps through March 31st of this year. And then January 1st of this year, minimum wage for workers doing work on federal contracts or federal projects, those workers, the minimum wage went up by 15 cents to $10.95 per hour. And then finally, at the end of July of this year, OSHA had issued worker safety guidance for employer coronavirus protection programs that really encourages collaboration with the employees and updates their guidance with respect to COVID mitigation procedures and protocols in the workplace to help limit or avoid the spread of the virus. It's updated, it's more comprehensive. If you want to look at and see what that is and use it as a guide for your workplace, there's a link here at the bottom that you can click on and find that updated guidance. I suggest many of you take a look at it and adopt plans that are consistent with that. Now, it's not an OSHA rule, promulgated rule, it's guidance at this point, but it's expected probably to be a rule or some portions of it in the future, but the guidance is helpful. Let's turn to the COVID-19 vaccinations in the workplace. There's 3 FDA-approved vaccinations. You all know that. The third one is Johnson & Johnson, but there's more to come. Last I checked, there was 80 other vaccinations that were working their way in the pipeline. So employers at some point here in the future are going to have a lot of options with respect to vaccinations and have to start thinking about this if they haven't already, of what they're going to do, if anything. The CDC has a tracker status for vaccinated individuals. I went on the website today. As of yesterday, 26 million people have been vaccinated. That, of course, changes by the minute. But that's as of yesterday. And that's just to get a little perspective, that's about just under 8% of the total US population that has been fully vaccinated, about double that. So 51 million have received 1 dose currently. So, the fully vaccinated is counting receiving 2 doses. Of course, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is only 1 dose, so they're going to have to kind of change their mechanisms for measuring this. We still don't know how long immunity lasts after vaccination and whether a vaccinated person can still spread COVID-19 to others. So until we know that information, employers, businesses should still, not just rely on the vaccinations. They still have to make sure that people are wearing, face coverings where warranted, social distancing, and doing all the proper cleaning and hygiene that's required. You all know that we're in phase 1B at this point, but I want to show you where we're moving toward. It's in 5 stages. Phase 1 is 3 stages. We're now moving toward phase 1C, which is adults of any age with high-risk medical conditions. And then spring and into the summer, we get to the remaining populations, the general population. And then finally with phase 3 is the summer and beyond. Just to kind of give you perspective. Now, this is through Maricopa County. Of course, all the counties have their own distributions and guidelines, but they kind of mirror each other depending on access to the vaccine and availability. Now, there's a lot of laws that employers and business owners have to consider before rushing into a vaccine program. Okay, and I just want to highlight very briefly what some of those laws are for you, so that these are things that you should consider as you're moving toward and understanding the vaccination programs and the legal considerations. So, and I'm going to talk about some of these more in depth, but we have the Americans with Disabilities Act. Discrimination and failure to reasonably accommodate disabilities could be a potential claim that is brought. And then you have federal, state civil rights laws. So Title VII prohibits discrimination in employment based on certain categories. And then there's state counterparts. For Arizona, that would be the Arizona Civil Rights Act. So a claim for discrimination based on religion or disability under those statutes. You have then the workers' compensation aspect. Okay, an injury or illness resulting from the vaccine is likely a compensable injury if the vaccine is required by the employer, but it's not absolutely certain. And of course, everything depends on the language of the insurance carrier's workers' comp plan. And then you want to monitor the law in this area as well. Consult with your legal counsel and a workers' comp carrier to verify. OSHA is another one, workplace safety. Employers have a general duty to keep their workplace safe and free from recognized hazards. You have the whistleblower provisions under OSHA, which if an employee comes to you and says, I have a serious concern that if I'm required to get a vaccine, that it's going to negatively affect me because I have, for example, a severe allergy. So you have whistleblower provisions. If someone's then terminated because they refuse to get a vaccine that's required by the employer, you got to be aware of that. And then, of course, OSHA has record-keeping requirements as well. Fair Labor Standards Act, you're going to have some claims in the future, if not already, that there's been a failure to pay employees for time spent getting the vaccine. If an employer requires it, Fair Labor Standards Act, you got to keep in mind wage and hour laws as well and under state laws. The National Labor Relations Act is a lot of employers think, oh, well, I'm not a unionized workforce, I don't have one, so I don't have to worry about the National Labor Relations Act. Well, this applies to all employers, or virtually all employers, and it allows employees to work together and talk and discuss working terms and conditions, and employers who prevent that, such as wages and other working terms and conditions, and employers cannot prevent employees from doing that. So if a bunch of employees get together and want to talk about their employer's vaccination program and adverse action is taken against those employees, there could constitute or trigger a claim under the National Labor Relations Act. And then, of course, other state and local laws may apply. So a lot of things to consider with respect to vaccine programs. We were waiting quite a while for the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, which regulates and governs the laws prohibiting discrimination in employment on the federal level. We were waiting for them to come out with guidance with respect to COVID-19 vaccines. They did on December 16th, and the guidance addresses three primary areas: the ADA and vaccinations, the ADA and Title VII issues regarding employer mandated vaccinations, so when employers require vaccinations in the workplace. And then it also addresses Title II of the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act. I'm going to call it GINA for purposes of the presentation, and then vaccination. So I'm going to go into some of these areas because they're really important. Tackling the first issue here is the ADA standards for disability-related inquiries and medical examinations. The ADA prohibits employers from making, this little background, for making disability-related inquiries and requiring medical examinations of employees unless those inquiries or exams are job-related and consistent with business necessity. In other words, employers should not be asking employees medical-related questions that could elicit information regarding a disability unless it's job-related and is necessary to your business. Okay, so start with that background. The standard that the EEOC tells us, in order to meet that standard, the job-relatedness standard, for vaccinations, they say the employer needs to reasonably believe, based on objective evidence, that an employee who does not answer the questions, and that's the pre-screening questions, and ultimately does not receive a vaccination will pose a direct threat to the health or safety of those in the workplace. Okay, and there's another analysis with respect to direct threat that I'm not going to get into, but suffice it to say, direct threat is going to be an evolving standard. And so as an employer, you need to determine whether a person who refuses to get, if you're going to require the vaccination, and they refuse to get vaccinated, are they a direct threat to your workplace? Some may say, well, yeah, anybody who doesn't get vaccinated is a direct threat. Well, that may not be the case. If you have 10 employees and 9 of them have been vaccinated, then the 10th employee may not be a direct threat to the other employees in the workplace. Okay, so it's a case-by-case evaluation. There are other considerations. I mean, employees, some may be working 100% remotely. If you say, okay, I'm going to have all my employees, I'm going to require them to get vaccinated, even the ones that are working remotely, the ones that are working remotely are not likely a direct threat to the workplace. So yeah, employers got to be careful with that. The EEOC also tells us that administration of the vaccine itself is not a medical examination. So it's not going to trigger that job-related and business necessity requirement that employers must meet in order to conduct examinations or to ask disability-related questions. And that's because administering the vaccine itself is not diagnostic, like a vision test or a blood test. And then finally, Title II of GINA is not implicated with respect to administration of the vaccine itself. You're not taking genetic information or acquiring genetic information from employees when they're getting vaccinated. But there are certain things that does trigger the employer's job relatedness requirement under the ADA. Okay, those are the pre-vaccination screening questions. So before anybody gets vaccinated, many of you may have already been vaccinated. You know that you have to answer certain questions like, are you allergic to any vaccinations? Do you have any adverse reactions to medications? Those are screening questions, right? And they're either verbal or questionnaires. Those are considered disability-related inquiries. So if you're going to ask those questions as an employer, you've got to make sure it's job-related and consistent with business necessity. Asking whether the employee has been vaccinated, the EEOC tells us that's not a disability-related inquiry. So I'm looking over here on the right side of the slide, just to try to make it a little more understandable. Asking that question alone is not a disability-related inquiry. An employer can ask that question. If you're going to ask that question, make sure you're uniformly applying and asking all your employees that question, and not just selecting one individual out. Also, be sure that you're not asking for why the individual has not been vaccinated. That will then trigger, would then be considered a disability-related inquiry. Same with asking for proof of the receipt of a vaccine. So if you have a incentive-based vaccination program, and in order to get the incentive, whether it's PTO or a small bonus, if you ask for proof of the receipt in order to get the incentive to incentivize employees, that's not a disability-related inquiry according to the EEOC. But you want to warn employees not to provide any other medical information along with that proof of receipt. Otherwise, now you are getting medical information, and there's again, would trigger employer responsibilities under the ADA. Asking an employee again why they didn't receive the vaccine, that is a disability-related inquiry. So some employers are having, internal surveys to gauge the level of interest that employees may have in the workplace to determine whether they're going to have a mandatory vaccination program or incentive-based program or any type of program at all. If you're going to have such a survey, you want to make sure that it's yes or no questions, not allowing for employees to input other information. I'm not going to get it because A, B, and C, or some companies will put like an other type of designation that employee can type in information. If you're going to be asking these type questions, I would do it in a yes or no fashion and not allowing more information to be coming from the employee. The overarching question here is, can employers require employees to get vaccinated when it becomes widely available? And the general answer is yes, with some important restrictions. There's 2 important exemptions that must be allowed according to the EEOC. One is disability. So if an employee makes an objection based on disability that they cannot safely receive the vaccine, employers must reasonably accommodate those individuals. Let me get into that a little further in just a minute. And then the other exemption is Title VII, religious beliefs under Title VII. So if an employee has a sincerely held religious belief that prevents them from getting the vaccine, then employers must also reasonably accommodate those with religious exemptions. Turning to ADA disability-based objections, an employer must accommodate the employee unless it would result in undue hardship to the employer. Undue hardship is a very high threshold to meet. It's a significant difficulty or expense incurred by the employer in providing accommodation. So in most cases, employers are going to be required to engage in the interactive process with the employee and determine if there's a reasonable accommodation that could be available. Remote work could be a possibility. Many people did that all back last March and April, and if an employer did that and the employee was able to work efficiently and remotely, employers are going to have a tough time showing that remote work is not possible. Of course, there's a lot of jobs that remote work is not possible. Can an employee wear PPE instead? What about a temporary leave of absence? And if an employee objects to a vaccine based on certain adverse contents that are in the vaccine, some like flu vaccines will have pork products in the vaccine itself, and some people are allergic to that. If there are other vaccines available that do not contain those adverse products, that may be explored as well. Turning to the religious-based exemption, under Title VII, employers are generally required to accommodate sincerely held religious beliefs. So according to the EEOC, once an employer is aware that an employee is objecting based on a religious basis to the vaccine, the employer has to reasonably accommodate that employee unless it would pose an undue hardship as defined by Title VII. And the definition of undue hardship under Title VII is different than it is under the Americans with Disabilities Act. It's actually a lower threshold, so it's harder for employers to meet the threshold under the Americans with Disabilities Act than it is under Title VII. But in most cases, again, you should try to reasonably accommodate the employee. The other thing that's really important here, that religion has been broadly interpreted by the courts when evaluating mandatory vaccination policies. And saying that the courts have found that even veganism, for example, is, that someone can have almost like a religious-based belief in veganism, and have found that lawsuits are able to proceed based on that on Title VII. So best practices: don't outright dispute the employee's claim to religion or religious practice. Instead, employers should engage in the interactive process to evaluate whether the employee has a sincerely held belief that rises to the level of religion, even if it's not what you believe is a legitimate religion. Also, determine whether there's a reasonable accommodation available that does not pose an undue hardship, and whether you have granted. Another factor is whether you as an employer have granted a similar accommodation for other reasons. So if you're granting accommodations based on disability objections, that's also a factor as well. Employers that are most likely to be interested in a mandatory vaccination program are hospitals and other healthcare providers, and businesses with large employee populations like in manufacturing that work closely together, meat packing plants, distribution centers, and then businesses with heavy customer service as well. If you're going to have a mandatory vaccination program, there's many things that you should be thinking about. You first want to issue a clearly written policy that's consistently applied, and that policy should include language that allows for exemptions that we spoke about, disability and religious-based exemptions. Include language that the company will address such requests on a case-by-case basis. You want to make sure to document legitimate business justifications for a mandatory policy. So if your business, gets 500 customers per day, and it's heavy customer service, and the dimensions of your business are relatively small, for instance, these are the type of facts and risk assessment that you should be documenting as to justify any type of requirement that you're going to have for a vaccination program in your workplace. You want to implement a reasonable vaccination deadline based on vaccine access and availability. So if you say, I want all my employees vaccinated by March 30th, it's probably not a reasonable deadline, since not everybody has access to the vaccine at that point. And the cost of the vaccine should ordinarily be paid by the government or the employee's health insurance, but to the extent there are any associated costs, if you're going to have a mandatory vaccine program, the employer, it's best practices to cover that cost, and also be sure to pay non-exempt hourly employees for time spent getting the vaccine. You want to implement a process for ensuring confidentiality of employee medical information, exemption requests, and reasonable accommodation. And then educate employees on safety concerns. And you can do this by pulling materials from the CDC and government agencies, the health organizations within the government agencies regarding the vaccine. You also want to look at if you have employees in other states. Not all states are the same, and state law governs the employment relationship. So, some states may have different laws that prohibit mandatory vaccination programs. So you want to consult with legal counsel, or at least review as much as you can with respect to state law requirements. If you are a unionized workforce, make sure that there's no obligation. There may be an obligation to bargain or to address the issue with the union. A big one here is consider the actual impact of a mandatory policy if you're going to require employees to get vaccinated. Polls are showing that a large percentage of the workforce, sometimes 40% or even the US population, don't plan to get this vaccine. And so, there's employers out there that are doing their own surveys within their organizations and are finding the same thing, that a large percentage don't plan to get the vaccine. So that may be a way to gauge how you're going to proceed if you're going to have a program at all. Because if you have a mandatory program and then 40% or 50% of your employees choose not to get the vaccine, now you're in a position that you're going to either have to discipline them or potentially terminate them or make reasonable accommodations. So it could trigger a lot more liability here. And also it could trigger just low morale for your workforce. And then finally, potential side effects. There hasn't been any long-term studies regarding these emergency use authorization vaccinations. And so, some employers are choosing to wait for a full-fledged FDA approval before making it a requirement in the workplace, if at all. Now, there's alternatives. The last point I'm going to make in this presentation is the alternatives. You can strongly encourage the vaccines, make it easy for your employees to get vaccinated. That might be paying for transportation offsite or pay time off to get the vaccine. Some employers are considering incentives like gift cards or additional paid time off. I do want to just let you know, even though some employers are moving ahead with incentives, there is some legal uncertainty with respect to incentive-based programs that you need to know about. Currently, there's no EEOC guidance that on the issue, but it is anticipated. There's a group of 40 businesses that had written a letter to the EEOC asking them to address whether employers can incentivize their employees to get vaccinated. And the EEOC is currently looking at least anecdotally, they're looking at the issue and carefully considering it. So we expect to receive guidance shortly. There are regulations under the ADA with respect to employer wellness programs. These are voluntary wellness programs. And there is a proposed rule that was just proposed in January this year to regulate wellness program incentives. And that states that disability-related inquiries and medical examinations may offer no more than de minimis incentives to encourage employees to participate. Now, that proposed rule is not about COVID-19 vaccines, it's about wellness programs. But if a vaccination program is ultimately considered to be a wellness program, then that would probably be the rule once it is in effect, once and if it is in effect. So keep that in mind, that there's probably going to be limits on the incentives that you're providing. So, if they're looking at de minimis, you're looking at a gift card of modest value is an example that they've given, or a water bottle, something to that effect. Gift card of modest value, what is that? $25, $50, something around there. If it's too large of an incentive, then it may not be viewed by the EEOC as a voluntary program, and so there could be some penalties and other liability that would be triggered if employees offer too great of incentives. So a lot to think about, guys. I think I'm just past my time, so I'm just gonna blow through this slide here, but I'm happy to answer any questions you have at the end of the presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Travis. That was really great information. Todd, you want to chime in?
Yes, thank you so much. That was great. I think for me, I got a lot of questions answered. You can imagine that these kinds of things always trigger new questions, and I'm sure that's not new for you. I was kind of writing a list of questions. So what we're going to do now is we're going to have a quick panel discussion, and so I'm going to bring in two business leaders that I mentioned earlier, and so we have Aaron Frazier and April Solomon of ATS, Arizona Technologies Specialists, and the MIM, respectively, to talk a little bit about maybe react a little bit and also to chat a little bit about their experiences. I'd like to start with both of you, April and Aaron. Any initial reaction to Travis's presentation? Did it answer some questions? Do you feel like this is something you want to explore in your organizations? Tell us where you are on that. I'll start. Whoever wants to start, jump in.
I'll go ahead.
All right. All right.
I'll go ahead and just say that I thought Travis's presentation was not only really comprehensive, but also very timely, especially as it related to vaccinations. It's something we've been giving a lot of thought about here. I'll talk in a minute or so about the process and the policy that we adopted here at MIM, which is actually going quite well. So I was very interested to see what you were saying from a legal standpoint about incentives and such. We decided early on that as soon as the vaccinations became available, we wanted to put something in place to ensure the health and safety of the team and obviously by extension, our guests coming in. So in fact, we created that fairly recently, and I just got numbers from my HR director. We have 78 team members, both full and part-time, and already 21 of them have been vaccinated, whether it's a first or a second dose. And that comes by way of some volunteer opportunities for those that hadn't squarely fit into those eligible categories, but it's also been for those that have. So we're off to a very healthy, I think, running start on getting everybody vaccinated, which is what we were hoping for. We did not mandate it. It was strictly voluntary. We have encouraged it, but part of our incentive, if you will, is allowing folks to take time off to volunteer for those slots as they became available if they were anxious to get vaccinated. We also offered them the sick time once they've had the vaccination, if they're not feeling well, whether that's first or second dose, and also the time off to go and get the vaccination. And if they were to notify us, and pretty much everyone has, we offered them a MIM branded mask, which everyone was happy to take. So that's worked really well for us. But you also covered some really interesting things early on that I thought were helpful too. So thank you for answering a lot of those questions.
Well, April, thank you. And I also want to commend you. I mean, it's hard now. I remember when the MIM first got here and everybody sort of scratched their head. Now it's synonymous with Arizona, and you're very publicly facing. And I know from our discussions that you've been able to open since July safely.
Yes.
And a lot of credit to you and your leadership. Clearly, the vaccine is the light at the end of the tunnel, but during the tough times, you're able to do that, keep people employed, and obviously keep one of our now wonders in Arizona open. So kudos to you and well done.
Thanks, Todd. It was and remains our number one priority. So, thus far we've been extraordinarily successful, and we expect that to continue.
Thank you. Aaron, obviously you all are very publicly facing as well. I know, we wouldn't be able to survive without you guys from a technology perspective. Talk to us about sort of your reaction to Travis's presentation and sort of your experience so far.
Yeah, so I thought Travis's presentation was fantastic, very educational, very comprehensive. So for us as a technology-based company, we were essential workers from the get-go. So we had to stay engaged with our clients, help keep their workforce working remotely effectively, and be there to support them. We have a little bit of a different task in front of us, is that most of our people are much younger. So we're working with 20-year-old employees that don't have access to the vaccine. And so we haven't quite had to deal with it yet. Yeah, that too. But we haven't had to face the vaccine situation yet, and I'm sure at some point we will. But for the most part, we don't have access to it, so it hasn't been too much of a topic. But as essential workers, we had to provide all the PPE for our guys to make sure, and gals, that they were safe out there amongst our clients and in their environments. But it did help that most people work remotely, so we didn't have to come into contact with people very often, and still don't.
Right, absolutely. Travis, let me go back to you real quick for a question. So it seems like on the standards, the burden of proof is definitely going to be on the employer, correct?
the burden of proof on the mandatory.
On the ADA standards?
Yes. So the employer, correct. They're going to have to be the one. So if an employee makes a claim, whether through the EEOC or files a lawsuit, right, the employer will have to come forward and say, I did not violate the ADA because of A, B, and C. And that's why I said you want to document your reasoning, your objective, your risk assessment, those type of things, if you're going to make it a requirement.
Understood. Thank you. April, let me go to you real quick for a question. You talked about wellness. We have obviously Wellness A to Z. And I'm glad to hear the fact that you're offering incentives for people to stay healthy, and I'm assuming the vaccine, but also you're giving people time off. Tell us about your wellness program and how you might package a vaccine element into your program.
Well, the health and safety protocols and all the measures that we've taken since before we opened remain in place. Certainly when we opened early August, we published all of those safety measures on our website so that guests could plan their visit and know what to expect coming in. As we all know, the mask ordinances are still in place. We actually offer disposable prepackaged masks when they come in. We have hand sanitizers throughout the building. You know, measures that I think we should expect in places where the public is visiting, especially indoors, right? We want to make sure, even though it's a very big museum, it's over 80,000 square feet of walkable gallery space, but 200,000 overall. It's made people feel very at ease and comfortable, but at the same time, we have to remain vigilant for all the obvious reasons. So we're continuing to do that. We had a wellness certification for team members, any volunteer team members that were coming back, and our vendors that basically answered a kind of a yes/no questionnaire about, you know, their health and how they were feeling. And should they not be feeling well, we encourage them not to come on site, and we would certainly encourage people to go home if they weren't feeling very well either. Now that we are sort of in the vaccination phase of this process, again, we are strongly encouraging it. It is going to be, you know, what we sort of anticipate will be a very strong voluntary, you know, selection for team members going forward. I mean, we've had nothing but really positive response, and those that haven't been eligible early on have found ways through volunteer opportunities to sign up and get their vaccinations. So that's become kind of part and parcel of the overall wellness of the team as the visiting public starts to come back more and more, which is exactly what we're seeing.
Well, it certainly gives people comfort. I know we broadcast an event from your studio, from your theater, and it was clear that that's something you take seriously, and I'm sure that that translates to your team members. Aaron, let me ask you, how are you dealing with on the wellness side, as far as, you know, during the pandemic and then looking forward beyond when we're going into the vaccine phase?
The wellness side?
Yes, in terms of incentives or any kind of wellness program that you have for your team members.
Well, we've always had wellness incentive programs for gym memberships and stuff like that, which obviously they can't take full advantage of at this point. But, you know, as far as a well laid out, defined program, I don't think we've developed one yet. Kind of part of why I was so interested in being a part of this panel is kind of seeing what some of the more established and larger entities are doing to create those paths for their employees and partners. So nothing on this end yet, but I'll just take a lot of this information in and try to develop something here over the next few weeks.
So based on what you heard from Travis, and given the fact that you are out, is thinking about vaccines, is this something that you feel like you want to mandate to your folks? Or are you looking more of a voluntary type of incentive approach? What are you thinking about?
I'm thinking that we'd probably just do more of a voluntary type approach. I have had our direct VPs of other departments have open conversation, candid conversation with their employees in their divisions. And as I said before, it's a much different perspective around vaccinations for people sub 35. If that's a clear line of the sand or not, I don't know. But it's much higher than 45% that say they will not get the vaccine. and would wait for more of a full-on FDA approval to do it. So I don't know when that's coming from the FDA. So we don't think that we'd mandate it, but we have, extensive PPE equipment for all of our employees. When they're here, everybody's 6 feet apart. We have more than enough offices for people to kind of isolate themselves when here. We do have people that might have any pre-existing conditions that are still working primarily remotely. But for the most part, that's about as far as we can go with having people or forcing people to get stuff, get vaccines.
Let me ask you a quick follow-up. Given that you have sort of an outwardly facing type of operation in some senses, like April's, when you're going into, for instance, our office or other offices where we might not be all spring chickens, what are you telling your clients when you have folks coming in and they're asking about what kind of precautions you're taking?
Yeah, so typically what we try to do is make sure that the offices that we're going to are empty. So we have keys, obviously, and ways to access our clients' buildings. And typically, most of the stuff we can do, 95% of the support, sometimes a little higher than that, can be done remotely, where we don't need to interact face-to-face with people. So that hasn't really been an issue. It's just been those, occasional times where we had to go on site to actually fix something. And then again, the person that might be in or around that desk area would not be there when our tech is on site to do whatever work it is. And then obviously we have the Lysol wipes. They use, they're sanitizing, they're wearing the masks, their PPE while they're working within that environment from the second they walk in to the second they walk out. We all have branded equipment. So the masks also represent who we are and kind of gives us lets our clients know that we have always taken this seriously, and that we're taking every precaution to make sure that we're being safe. More importantly, we haven't counted any days that people take off if they're feeling a little bit under the weather. Just take the day off. It doesn't count against your vacation days. It doesn't go against your sick days. So we've been really lenient on that as well. And then obviously take your temperature if you're feeling a little off. That's kind of iffy, but just anything we can do to try to prevent spreading the disease. So we try to be as cautious as possible.
Well, clearly you all are doing a good job managing that. I know for us, you haven't missed a beat, so appreciate that. So Travis, one of the discussions we had the executive committee this morning also was about going back and the fact that we're probably going to be in a hybrid environment. It seems like everybody wants to do that. And looking at your presentation, is that a reasonable accommodation for somebody who's nervous or for whatever reason doesn't want to have the vaccine, to say we're coming back, there's an option to come back, but if you don't, then the accommodation will be that you can work remotely?
Yes. Short answer. I love short answers. Yeah, that is a reasonable accommodation. Remote work, is that a possibility? If it's feasible, that is an accommodation. If they object, but we're talking about accommodations, if they object, let's say it's a requirement, that you have, you don't have to reasonably accommodate someone just if they're just fearful in general, right? You have obligations under the ADA or Title VII if they object based on disability or religious-based objections, but employers don't have to reasonably accommodate everybody, right? And then there's smaller employers who are under 15, fewer than 15, if they have fewer than 15 employees, let's say small businesses, there's probably some attending today. They should try to reasonably accommodate their employees. Employers should be flexible as much as possible during this pandemic, but they may not be required under the Americans with Disabilities Act if they have fewer than 15 employees. Now, counting employees is a whole nother issue. Yeah, I mean, I told you it was going to be a short answer and it wasn't. So the other thing I just wanted to mention real quick, just to clarify the burden of proof question you asked me. The plaintiff or the employee always has the burden of proof, okay? But if they make a claim, the employer has to come forward in order to rebut that, right? That claim with evidence, okay?
So real quick, you also talked about you have to sort of establish that there's a threat, correct? And you can say if 9 out of 10 have been vaccinated, that one person probably isn't a threat. So, how does that work from a practical perspective? How do you know when there's no threat level within an organization? It seems like it's a little subjective.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's going to be, it's kind of a moving target too, because it's going to evolve over time, right? And herd immunity and all these other things that can consider. I mean, what's happening now, employees may be a direct threat, but 2 years from now may no longer be a direct threat, right? Because now there might be herd immunity by that point, or there's a number of other vaccines and there's all kinds of options available. So the direct threat analysis, the EEOC does put forward a kind of a step-by-step approach, and I'm happy to share that with you, but it is kind of complicated, but yeah, it's going to be a direct threat to the workplace is going to be a kind of a moving target. Now,
okay.
But, you know, you can ask if you have a workforce and you can ask your workforce if they've been vaccinated. We know that that's not a disability related inquiry. So you can get kind of numbers from and use that as an assessment tool, a risk assessment tool for establishing direct threat. Also, if you're a healthcare provider, you're a healthcare worker and you're around vulnerable patient populations and things like that, that is another factor. I mean, it's like, who are you interfacing with, right? Are they a direct threat to the workplace and customers, those type of things?
Okay, and then finally, just one thing, there was an asterisk in your presentation that basically said, unless prohibited by state law, which I think, of course, is there anything in Arizona state law currently, and of course they're in session, so that you will pay attention to this part of statute, or is there nothing there right now?
Right now, there's nothing I'm aware of as far as legislation goes specifically related to COVID-19.
Okay.
But there's local, there's municipal ordinances, those type of things that are going to be happening. And in other states, California is always one that's going to, if you have employees in California, they have local ordinances, they have county, they have state, and a lot of other states do that too. So employers want to make sure that they consider all of those factors as they develop these programs.
No, absolutely. And I would encourage folks to call you with those specific questions. April, and I know you've been back. I'm assuming there are probably folks who maybe haven't come back fully yet, but I know a lot of employers are thinking about what does it look like to come back? We are. So tell us about, what are some of the things that we should be thinking about as we want to return back to the office, maybe some key metrics or just considerations that you're suggesting?
Oh, timely question, because I had some follow-up thoughts after I heard Aaron talk about, what he's doing and has done, not just for clients, but for his employees. There's a few things, Todd, that I want to point to. So number one, I think it's really important for everyone to remain as flexible as possible. Travis talked about this from a legal standpoint where things are still changing. There's nothing that's completely set in stone yet, while we are definitely trying to get our arms around everything. I think it's really important to be as flexible as possible with people, because when we think about wellness, we know that includes mental health. And the stress that this has put all of us under, are creating, a different set of challenges that we, if not immediately, will eventually have to contend with. So one of the things that we did very early on, Todd, was create a telework schedule that was rotating, right? We're a public-facing institution. We have to serve the public and our guests. But how can we do that that's sort of fair and equitable as much as possible across the team? I mentioned we have 78 team members, full and part-time. About a third of those sit in one congregate space within the museum that, when you think about distancing and all of those considerations, best served us while we were waiting for case counts to eventually take the dramatic downturn that they are now, to rotate people in the office 2 to 3 days a week to start, and only increase that over time as we saw progress. I know that flexibility meant a lot to people that were some maybe more nervous than others. And there's obviously a very large spectrum of folks that would prefer not to leave the house at all, and those that are willing to go out. But just the mental, I think, wellness that provided, knowing that there was flexibility, was really key. I also meant to mention that MIM has had an employee assistance program in place that coincides with our health benefits for a long time. So we've always encouraged folks that are under a lot of stress and strain and, really need perhaps some professional assistance, we've encouraged them to take advantage of that. We also extended the FFCRA benefits after they had expired federally, so that should there be an instance, whether it was directly affecting a team member or a family member or a significant other, that person would be assured that they would have that time available without eating into their vacation or personal time. So we've tried to do as much as possible to really consider what it means to bring people back safely and gradually over time. March 1st, this past week, sort of marked the moment where we were back 5 days a week full time. Obviously, because of the really positive trending downward with case counts and obviously the uptick in vaccinations, and all of that is bringing to bear on a much better environment, I think, here. So we're finally back full time. But again, I think the bottom line is to stay as flexible as possible and accommodate the needs to the extent that you're able to.
Yeah, no, I love those comments, and kudos to you for extending some of those benefits that are so key for people. And really that ends up good for everybody because you keep everyone healthy. So well done. Let me go to you, Aaron, for the final question. Technology. I mean, 20 years ago, I don't know what we would have done. I guess mailed stuff back and forth and called.
Right.
What's going to be the role of technology in the next 2 to 5 years as you see this? I mean, it's got to be different.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely see that there's going to be a little bit more of a request to work from home, but the technology, fortunately for us, it was pretty much in place, right? We had the ability to quickly, get people working from home safely, VPN back into their offices with little disruption to kind of their environment other than where they were sitting. So Zoom was out several years before. Nobody knew the name before, this whole thing happened, but it's been out for quite a while, and they'd been telling everybody that they were going to be the next platform. Some of us should have listened. I guess I could have been rich by now if I would have bought their stock back when it was $2 a share, but who would have known? But yeah, all the stuff that we needed to work within these parameters that COVID created, they were already here and in place. So the technology, it's there. Security is probably going to be the biggest issue going forward. I think if that's what people really want to focus on and pay attention to, speak with professionals, especially if you're a business owner, make sure that you have the proper security protocols in place, even the minimum, right? Because there's going to be a huge a massive uptick in security threats. And obviously we're already seeing that. You can see it all over the news. I get updated daily, and it used to be a little blurb, and now it's about 6 pages on average of different places that have been hacked and compromised, and records, so that we have to go back and make sure that our clients, depending on what line of business applications they're utilizing, whether or not those companies were hit, so that we can get in front of that with our clients. So that's one of the things I think everybody should focus on going forward, is just to make sure that they're practicing safe computer habits, if you will, and working with their companies and companies like ours to have security protocols in place and keeping everybody safe on that side as well, right? We think only about wellness as the human body and everything else, but your computer and your company have to keep safe as well. So that's kind of what we're looking forward to for our next step.
Well, I know that's something you work on with us on a daily basis, and we appreciate
Absolutely.
that. And thank you. We're going to wrap it up here real quick. We're going to do a quick lightning round. It's fun, I promise. No crazy questions, just fun stuff. So I'll start with you, Aaron. You are a world traveler. Where's your first post-COVID trip?
Oh, I've been all over the place. I was supposed to be at a wedding in Singapore in October, so I might bring that back. And if it's safe to go next October, just go ahead and go. Even though the wedding's not going to be there, wanted to go to Thailand, wanted to go to Vietnam. My dad did 2 tours over there. Was stationed at Da Nang, so that's always been one of those things where I want to go back and see where he was at. So I think that's probably going to be the first big one outside of the country. Yeah, and then my usual, Mexico and all that kind of fun stuff. I'll get back to going to Rocky Point quite often during the nice months. and then snowboarding is Denver and or anywhere around Colorado and California. So that's all close to home, and that's my plans. Just kind of get out and just travel again and get to see other cultures, other people, and all that kind of fun stuff that I enjoy doing.
Absolutely. Well, Singapore is awesome. You'll love it. I hope you get there soon. Travis, how about you?
I think Hawaii is, I want to take my kids, my family, my wife's family's from Hawaii originally. So my kids have never been there. So I think it'd be fun to have them have that experience. Try not to do as many touristy things and then kind of live locally for about a week, but that's what we're looking forward to doing.
That sounds perfect. How about you, April?
Oh, I'm just going to say anywhere with sand, sand and sun. Yes, definitely Hawaii. I'd love to go to Bali, actually. And certainly Cabo. I mean, that's a little bit closer, but yeah, sand, sun, beautiful sunsets, cocktails of sorts.
I love it. See, this is the perfect way to end this. This is great. Light at the end of the tunnel and travel. Well, I want to thank all of you for joining us today. Really a great hour spent together. Really good information. Thank all of you for your leadership and your willingness to participate. Our upcoming WorkWELL forum is going to be a Spanish work in Espanol on April 15th. And then we're going to have a PlayWell workshops webinar in May of 2021 of this year, and then a WorkWELL in June. So we are looking forward to hopefully seeing you there. Thank you to all of you out there. Please stay safe, and we will see you at the next one. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.